Okay, so over to our next presenter who needs very little introduction from me. It's HBF's Executive Chairman, Stewart Baseley.
Good morning. Thank you, Neil. This is our first HBF live event, as you've heard, and some 650 of you registered to listen in this morning. So that's absolutely fantastic from our perspective, and a very warm welcome to all of you. And thank you also to the Secretary of State for his kind remarks, and also for taking some time out to come along and say something to us this morning. I think we all appreciate whatever our views of what the government has been doing over the last 3 months, that cabinet ministers in particular, of course, are particularly busy individuals at this time. I've been in this business, as many of you know, for over 40 years, and I have to tell you that in that time I thought I'd seen it all, but frankly the last 3 months, the events of the last 3 months have been completely unprecedented and unparalleled, and I've never seen anything quite like this. So what I thought I'd do this morning is just recap briefly on how that 3 months has played out from an HBF perspective and from an industry perspective, what we've been up to collectively, where we stand today, how things are going out there today, and what's coming next in terms of potential economic support, and what the future might hold in terms of how housing policy could be affected by the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, time won't permit me this morning to talk about everything that I'd like to talk about, but we will have some time at the end to take questions, and I'd be delighted to try to answer those as best I can later in the event. So HBF, like every other organization in the country, had to think about how it was going to organize itself, think about how it was going to operate through these unparalleled crisis times. We spent the first couple of weeks of March ensuring our people were able to work remotely, work from their homes, making sure they had the right technology, with the ambition, the aim to ensure that we provided you, our members, with as good a service, as excellent a service as we possibly could, despite the difficult conditions that we were all operating in. And we thought about that in terms of what were the most important things that we could do. First, we needed to understand what was happening to you, what your experiences were on the ground, how you were dealing with the challenges of having to close down your offices, but at that stage still operate on site. We wanted to make sure we had effective forms of communication with you and communication with government. And so our regular meetings, which many of you attend and which typically take place 2, 3, 4 times a year, were increased in frequency, turned into video meetings using Teams and Zoom. And we were talking to you through one method or another on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, ensuring we were absolutely up to speed with what was happening. And we were also open communication at the same time with government departments right across government, from number 10 and number 11 through MHCLG, who of course are our principal government department, but also with BEIS and with Homes England. And again, communication with them became daily and as regular as was necessary. And it was important that we made sure that government understood what was happening to you out in the field. And at the same time, we wanted to make sure we kept you up to date with everything that was happening. Government was producing announcements at an extraordinarily rapid rate. And so we decided to set up our coronavirus daily briefing, which hopefully you all receive, and also a dedicated resource page on our website where you can go to get access to information on a broad range of issues connected with coronavirus, not necessarily directly related to housing, but issues which would be of interest and concern to you. The home building industry, as I just said, went into the coronavirus pandemic knowing it was going to have to largely close its offices, but actually trying very hard to keep sites operational, certainly during the early days. But it became apparent very quickly after Boris Johnson's address to the nation at 8:30 on Monday, the 23rd of March, an event I suspect that for the rest of our lives we'll all remember where we were that Monday night at 8:30, when effectively he imposed conditions on the country unprecedented in peacetime, conditions in many ways even more extreme than people had to endure during the Second World War. And as a consequence of that announcement, that stay-at-home message, even though the government made it clear in the coming days that actually it was okay for construction to continue, for a whole variety of reasons, that didn't happen. In some cases, companies felt it was difficult to do so whilst respecting social distancing rules. In other cases, because the supply side of the economy began to shut down, the house builders followed suit. And also there was mixed messaging from government at that point. It's okay to keep construction going, but advice to customers and the public not to move, advice to solicitors to effectively enter into standstill arrangements on contracts, etc. And so that as a consequence, through that week of March the 23rd, gradually most of the industry was forced by one method or another to close down. From our engagement at that point with members, it was clear that you were concerned about a number of things. Small builders in particular were very concerned about access to finance to help keep them going. The business interruption loan scheme, known as CBILS, became something which we became very engaged with in the weeks that followed. We also were helping people to navigate the difficulties with the furlough scheme, about which in the early days certainly there were a lot of questions as to exactly how it was going to operate. And we acted, as we often do, as a conduit between you, the membership, and the government to try to get satisfactory answers to those questions. But uppermost in people's minds was how we could actually get back to work in a safe fashion. What do we have to do to enable the building sites of the United Kingdom, but particularly England and Wales, of course, where we function, to be able to operate whilst respecting the government's rules, the Public Health England guidelines, and the social distancing rules that were in place. And so we began discussions in earnest with government about creating a charter which government would sign and which HBF would sign, a joint document which would sit as an umbrella document and not in any way intended to supersede any individual company's protocols, but to support them. And most importantly, to demonstrate to the public, who of course have got concerns at this point about the virus spreading through activity on building sites and elsewhere in the economy, to demonstrate to the public that we had got safe protocols in place. And at the same time, we also began work on sales protocols to demonstrate how we could open our sales offices and our show homes again in a safe way so that the public would be able to visit when they were allowed, and actually continue the process of making sales, making reservations, which of course is the lifeblood of what we do. And alongside those discussions, we were talking daily to suppliers, to major suppliers, several of whom I know are on the line today, making sure they knew what the house builders were thinking, and in return, of course, making sure the house builders knew where the suppliers were standing, because what we wanted to ensure was that as house building came back online, the suppliers were not caught out by surprise, and were ready to make sure that they could get their materials to site as required. And that all culminated in the week of May the 11th with a series of announcements which enabled the house building industry to get going again in earnest, enabled the sales market to open up. We were the first industry to be effectively allowed back to work in that sense, the first element of non-essential retail, but also much broader into the second-hand market, which is also so vital to us. 2/3 of our buyers are not first-time buyers. And it was essential to us to get the estate agents, and again, I know a number of you are in the room today, to get the estate agents, to get the whole second-hand market moving. And we also worked with the National Association of Removal Firms, to make sure that they could also move people, of course, an essential ingredient at the end of the day, and making sure the transactions happen. And we lent our name to their protocols to show that we had been working with them and supported what they were doing. So this Herculean effort, as I say, by everybody concerned, enabled the housing market in its totality to be able to return to work in the middle of May. Although, of course, as you will appreciate, it isn't necessarily work as you know it, because by definition, we're not as efficient. Production levels cannot be as efficient when we're maintaining 2-meter social distancing rules across all the facets of what we do. So sales are being done by appointment at this point, as opposed to customers walking in off the street. And the number of trades that are allowed to be operating in individual homes has, of course, been restricted. And that means that building programs are taking longer. And the charter is on the screen, and I'm delighted that over 100 HBF members have signed it so far. And if you're not one of those, but you'd like to lend your name to it, just let us know, and we can, of course, do that for you. So here we are, about a month or so since the restart, and so far so good. We've been very pleasantly surprised by the level of productivity which builders have managed to maintain. We haven't heard too many stories about difficulties with supply, which is obviously excellent at this point. And equally, the interest level from the public has been somewhat better, somewhat higher than perhaps many of us anticipated. Of course, it's difficult to know at this stage, too early to tell. We are only a month in, and there's inevitably some pent-up demand being released, and a lot of people are still at home. So I don't want to get too carried away with this, but I think it's fair to say that sales so far have exceeded most of our expectations. And I say that right across the country. And so we start to think about what happens next, because clearly as the government starts to turn its attention, its focus is now very firmly on the recovery stage, as is evident from the knowledge that's in the public domain about work that's going on in government towards potentially some form of July or early autumn economic fiscal statement. We turn our mind to what our role in that can be. And as always, the home building industry is at the forefront, potentially, of economic revival, because we are such an important industry in the economy generally. We employ hundreds of thousands of people, both directly, who come on our sites and build our homes, but indirectly, through all the trades and suppliers and the peripheral industries which support home building in the new homes market, but also the activity that's generated by home transactions in the second-hand market. In the new homes industry alone, we created something like 800,000 jobs in the last year, and we generated something like £42 billion worth of economic activity. And that makes us a very relevant player in terms of UK PLC's recovery. And so we've been turning our mind to what measures the government could potentially introduce which might help the UK economy to recover more quickly. The first important point I should make is that none of the measures that are up on the screen have been agreed by government. Indeed, they are in the very early stages of discussion in most parts. But it's also worth mentioning that the government is very interested in this area, and not just in talking to us directly, but also, I mentioned earlier, the Construction Leadership Council and the work that we do on that. And we've been asked by the Construction Leadership Council to lead its economic recovery plan for housing. And we're doing that with a range of other bodies that take part in the housing space. So clearly our number one ask, no surprise to any of you, is around Help to Buy. Firstly, of course, we're very concerned about the very acute problem that exists today around the December 31st practical completion date, the date that sits within the Help to Buy contract that you enter into as builders with Homes England. It's been there, frankly, since Help to Buy began, but this year it matters more because the existing Help to Buy scheme is currently slated to come to an end next March. And there are, of course, potentially tens of thousands of customers around the country who were expecting to move into a home in the autumn using a Help to Buy loan, but where those homes are now likely to be completed next year because of the delays to build programs caused by the shutdown in March and April and early May, and then the reduced or the impact of elongated build programs on the time it's going to take to complete those homes and enable those customers to move in. And as it stands, because the homes won't be necessarily practically built and complete by December the 31st, those customers would miss out on a Help to Buy loan potentially. And that's an area of extreme concern to us, and an area that we are in hot discussion with government about right across government at this point. And our aim there is, of course, to get that date changed somewhere around mid-March to enable those homes to be completed in the spring rather than in the autumn. The second point on Help to Buy is a bigger point, and probably a tougher point in many ways for government, in that we actually think it would be beneficial for government to think about not introducing the new Help to Buy scheme that's slated to start next April, but to continue with the existing scheme for the further 2 years of the life of Help to Buy. Why do we think that's the case? Because we know from historic data that around 40% of Help to Buy sales, and they currently run at about 50,000 sales a year, so roughly 20,000 sales a year, would not be captured by the new Help to Buy scheme because of two things in the new Help to Buy scheme. The first is that second-time buyers are excluded from taking part, and the second is the introduction of price caps around the country, which will exclude about 20% of first-time buyers that currently use the scheme from being able to take part as well, because they're buying above the price caps, depending upon where in the country it is. And so we think it would be sensible, given that Help to Buy plays a vital role in giving confidence to you builders to build, and indeed, obviously, therefore, keeping output levels up. We think it would be sensible for the government to not introduce the new Help to Buy scheme, but to continue the existing scheme. Now, that is not something that they've currently agreed to do in any shape or form, but that is our number one ask, as you can see from the list in front of you. We're also very keen to see measures to boost the second-hand market. I mentioned a few minutes ago that something like 2/3 of our buyers are not first-time buyers, and the vast majority of those, of course, will come, therefore, from the second-hand market with homes to sell, as a consequence of which we think a stamp duty holiday would help to generate activity in the second-hand market. And both of these measures are intended, the Help to Buy extension and the second-hand market points, are intended to help boost consumer confidence. And of course, nobody at the moment knows quite how consumers are going to behave, and none of us know what's going to happen in the economy generally and how much masked unemployment there is within the hidden furlough numbers that we're all seeing at the moment. 8.9 million people, I think, now on furlough at this point. But there is concern, obviously, that the economy is going to go into recession, and that clearly will dent consumer confidence. And therefore, our message to government is that whatever we can do or whatever they can do to improve consumer confidence will help us have the confidence to continue building homes at the appropriate level. And of course, that matters because what we do is not just economically important, as I said earlier, but socially important, because we build homes. We build homes where people live, where people raise their families. And HBF and others have spent the last 10 years or more trying to help the government and others understand the scale of the housing deficit in this country, the undersupply of homes that's been running now for the best part of 30 years. And we've made the most extraordinary progress. In the last 10 years, we've virtually doubled production from a low point after the last recession of about 125,000 homes a year to where we are today at around 250,000 homes a year. And clearly, 2020 is going to be an exceptional year, and it's going to see a decline in that 250,000 figure. And there's nothing any of us, frankly, can do about that. But we can potentially do something together about what happens in 2021. And clearly measures such as those we've outlined to government on stamp duty, on not introducing the new Help to Buy scheme, but extending the old Help to Buy scheme, would, in our judgment, help you collectively maintain housing output at a higher level than it otherwise would be. And it's not, this is something which applies across the market, of course. We are keen to see all builders flourish as best we possibly can. And that means a lot of attention is also going on within HBF to what could be done to help retirement builders, what could be done to help the small and medium-sized builders, and what generally we can do with Homes England, and what role Homes England and housing associations might be able to play working with us in that economic recovery. I repeat, it's not an exhaustive list, and none of this is agreed. These are all effectively ideas, and they are subject to discussion. And clearly, the government is going to have a lot of calls on its money from all sorts of sectors. And I think we have to understand and respect that coming out of this particular pandemic are going to be cries for help from right across the economy. Our cry is more about helping the economy than it is helping us. But at the same time, clearly the Treasury has to allocate its funding as appropriate. Just looking beyond the pandemic briefly, the slide in front of you now shows some of the items that were on our inbox, if you will, pre the pandemic 3 months ago. These were the top items that were concentrating HBF's mind. There are always items on planning and technical matters, which I haven't listed, but they're always top of HBF's mind, of course. And, what's going to happen to some of these items post to the recovery is a question that I am often asked. And, time doesn't permit me to talk about all of these items today, but let me just pick on three. The environment. We started 2020 with the environment at the top of our priority list, with the government producing an environment bill, which is going to define in law a very tough to deliver objective of the economy going to a net zero economy. And we were asking the question, what role are we going to play in that, and how are we going to deliver that? I really don't think there is any chance post the pandemic of the environment not dominating the agenda going forward. I think the government will be even more focused in that area than it is today. Similarly, on building safety, obviously it's barely 3 years since the Grenfell tragedy, and the consequences of that for the families, clearly forever, for us in terms of building regulations in the here and now, and the government will continue its drive towards ensuring building safety, and that is something we're going to have to continue to work very actively on. And similarly on quality, the announcement the other week, very positive announcement from our point of view, that the government had decided to accept our proposal to move towards a voluntary ombudsman scheme. That is excellent, and we're in the process now of setting that up with Natalie Elphicke, as you heard from the Secretary of State, leading that charge for us. But we have to deliver that, and that means we have to make sure that works, because be clear, if it doesn't work, and the slight threat was there from the Secretary of State's comments, then be clear, if it doesn't work, the Secretary of State will mandate. So I think once the pandemic is over, whilst there'll be a lot of focus on the recovery and making sure that the right economic levers are being pulled to enable us to deliver the homes that the country needs and play our role in that very important part of the social fabric of the UK, the issues on the screen, plus many more, will be back at the top of our agenda. And of course, as ever, we will continue to serve you in the best way we can, ensuring that home builders and HBF members' views are represented to government to ensure they understand what will work on a practical basis. So, of course, there is, as ever, so much more that I could talk about. As you know, the range of topics which HBF covers these days has changed dramatically in the 15 years that I've been your chairman. A remarkable number of topics that we talk to government and others about on a daily, weekly basis. But time doesn't permit that. I've gone on probably far too long already. So I'll close at that point. Very happy, as I said earlier, to take questions later. And I'm sure there'll be some interesting remarks coming from Lucian and Robert and David as well. And at the end, we'll all very happily take your questions. So thank you very much indeed for your time and attention. And I look forward to talking to you again later.
So thanks, Stewart. Thanks for that presentation, which was really insightful. I think there's a couple of questions I've really got to ask as a result of the response that we've received on the poll. The first one, obviously, is with regards to the extension to the current Help to Buy scheme, Stewart. That's something that's creating a great deal of concern across the industry and has led to many questions today. Is there anything you can add on in addition to what you said in your presentation, about where things currently stand with regards to the current scheme, which is intended to end at the end of the year?
Well, look, 233 people have voted. I'm looking at my other screen here, and 65% of you have said that Help to Buy is the single most important thing the government could pull a lever on, 30% stamp duty and 5% the rest. So clearly Help to Buy is uppermost in your minds, and we absolutely understand that. But unfortunately, no, Neil, there isn't really a lot I can add to the information that I just, talked through. We have made it abundantly clear to the Chancellor, but to everybody else across government, that this is a major priority for the industry. We have explicitly talked through the December 31st issue, which is a kind of an issue of paramount importance now. We've explained why it's important now, why it matters today to real customers. And as some of you may know, we're starting to get letters, emails at HBF from those real customers asking us, and we're also aware from conversations we're having with members that sales are being lost day by day because of that December 31st practical bill completion date, which you simply can't meet now because of the delays in construction that you've experienced through A, the lockdown, and B, the elongated build programs that inevitably are a consequence of the way you're having to work, at least for the interim. So I think there is sympathy with that. I think, to be frank, nobody I speak to in government disagrees with the logic of extending that date, but as yet, rather disappointingly, they haven't announced it, and we just have to keep pressing and pressing and pressing. On the bigger issue, as I said, the sort of slightly hotter political potato of what happens to the Help to Buy scheme between next April and its currently slated end date of March the 31st, 2023. Again, those discussions are ongoing, but I think it's, and this may be, not easily acceptable to people in the audience, and I totally understand that frustration, but for government, they've only really started to turn their attention to issues like this in the last week to 10 days, as the government machine has started to move on from the final knockings of how the furlough scheme is going to work and other areas of existing support schemes into the future economic recovery package. And a lot of work is now going on right across industry, not just with the home building sector on that. And we're anticipating that hopefully there will be a July mini budget or some kind of economic statement by the Chancellor.
With regards to the green recovery, you talked about the environment, and I was going to ask about how serious government is with regards to the green recovery, the environmental issues that you mentioned. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll come back to that at the end, because I suspect that our other panelists today will have a view on that as well. So again, just thanks for all your questions, all of you out there. The one thing I should mention right now is, for those of you who have been furiously taking notes, the slides and the webinar recording will be available at the beginning of next week, and when ready, we'll send an email out to all the delegates that are here today to let you know. So no need for taking copious notes. So thanks, Stewart, and we will come back to the green recovery piece at the end.